The Supreme Court blocked President Trump's plan to deploy National Guard troops to Chicago, sending shockwaves through the nation. The court's swift action via its shadow docket underscored the gravity of the situation and drew a clear line against unchecked presidential authority. The majority opinion found the administration's legal justification lacking, reaffirming that the president cannot use the military as a domestic police force without a compelling constitutional mandate. This landmark decision set a powerful precedent, igniting debate over the limits of executive power and the balance between federal and state authority. The ruling reinforced that the United States is a federation of states, and the president's power to deploy troops domestically is strictly limited. In the summer of 2020, the Trump administration made headlines by seeking to deploy National Guard troops to Chicago, arguing that the city was experiencing a severe breakdown of law and order. The administration claimed that escalating violence, property damage, and unrest in the city's streets required a strong federal response to restore stability and protect citizens. A key justification for this move was the need to safeguard federal buildings, particularly those being used to detain migrants. Officials insisted that these sites had become targets for protesters, and that only a significant show of force could ensure their security. Administration officials repeatedly argued that local law enforcement agencies were overwhelmed and unable to maintain order, framing the deployment as a necessary step to protect federal interests and maintain public safety. However, critics quickly denounced the plan, viewing it as a political maneuver designed to intimidate protesters, suppress dissent, and challenge the authority of local governments. Many saw it as an attempt to federalize law enforcement for political gain. The administration faced significant legal hurdles, struggling to cite a clear legal basis for the deployment. The Posse Comitatus Act, a long-standing federal law, generally prohibits the use of military forces in domestic law enforcement without explicit congressional authorization, raising serious constitutional questions. Illinois leaders, including Governor Pritzker and Mayor Johnson, strongly opposed the plan. They argued that local police were fully capable of handling the situation, and that federal intervention would only escalate tensions and undermine local authority. The dispute quickly escalated into a major legal and political battle, raising fundamental questions about federalism, the separation of military and civilian authority, and the limits of presidential power in times of crisis. Ultimately, the Supreme Court was forced to intervene, taking up the case to resolve the dispute and clarify the boundaries between federal and state authority in matters of domestic security. In a moment that captured the nation's attention, the Supreme Court's 6-3 majority, composed of both conservative and liberal justices, stepped in to block President Trump's controversial order. This decision was not just a routine ruling, it was a powerful demonstration of the court's ability to unite across ideological lines when the Constitution is at stake. The justices' rare consensus sent a strong signal about the constitutional limits of executive power, especially when it comes to the delicate balance between federal authority and states' rights. After careful review, the majority concluded that the president lacked any clear legal authority to deploy the National Guard for law enforcement purposes in Illinois, particularly over the objections of the state's own government. This finding reaffirmed the principle that the federal government cannot simply override state sovereignty without explicit constitutional or statutory backing. In their unsigned opinion, the justices wrote, "The government has failed to identify a source of authority that would allow the military to execute the laws in Illinois." This clear and direct language left little room for ambiguity, making it evident that the court was drawing a firm line in the sand. However, not all justices agreed. The dissenting justices voiced concerns about limiting the executive's ability to respond to emergencies, arguing that the federal government must retain the power to act decisively when states are unable or unwilling to restore order. They warned that tying the president's hands could have serious consequences in times of national crisis. The ruling was delivered through the court's so-called shadow docket, a process reserved for urgent cases that require immediate attention. This expedited decision underscored just how significant and time-sensitive the constitutional question was, as the nation watched events unfold in real time. By acting swiftly, the Supreme Court not only prevented the deployment of federal troops but also sent a clear and unmistakable message to the White House. Even in moments of crisis, the rule of law and constitutional boundaries must be respected. This landmark decision highlighted the judiciary's crucial role as a check on executive power, demonstrating that the courts are willing to intervene, even in the most urgent and politically charged situations, to uphold constitutional principles. The use of the shadow docket in such a high-profile and consequential case emphasized the court's determination to act quickly and decisively, ensuring that no branch of government exceeds its lawful authority, and reinforcing the enduring strength of America's constitutional system. The court's rejection was rooted in the separation of powers and federalism. The majority found the administration lacked valid legal authority, as the military cannot be used as a national police force without explicit constitutional or congressional approval. The situation in Chicago did not meet the threshold for insurrection or invasion, and the state had not requested help. The justices emphasized that extraordinary executive claims require extraordinary justification, which was absent here. The ruling reinforced the judiciary's role as a check on the executive branch and insisted on clear statutory authority for such actions. The lack of a specific law authorizing the deployment proved fatal to the administration's case. The decision stands as a reminder that necessity does not override constitutional limits. This ruling marked a rare and significant defeat for Trump at the Supreme Court, breaking his strong record on emergency applications. The majority included Trump's own appointees, signaling the decision was based on legal principle, not politics. The outcome complicates the narrative of a partisan court and highlights its independence. The loss may signal a turning point, with the court growing more skeptical of the administration's emergency requests. The decision serves as a warning against bringing weak or constitutionally dubious cases. Unlike earlier victories on national security, this case involved domestic military force against a state's wishes, a line the court would not cross. The ruling is a powerful reminder that presidential power is sharply limited when it clashes with state rights and civil military norms. The decision is a landmark in the ongoing struggle between presidential power and state sovereignty. By blocking the deployment, the court reaffirmed federalism and the authority of states over local law enforcement. The ruling sets a high bar for future presidents seeking to deploy troops domestically without state consent. It requires a clear and present danger, not just political disagreement or protests. This limitation preserves the separation between military and civilian life. State leaders now have a strong legal precedent to resist federal overreach. The dissent warned of risks if states can block federal action, ensuring the debate over executive power continues. The balance of power remains delicate. But in future crises could shift the legal landscape again. The Chicago ruling sets a powerful precedent for future conflicts between the White House and local governments. It provides a clear legal framework for cities to resist similar federal interventions. The decision narrows the circumstances under which the Insurrection Act can be used, demanding clear evidence of rebellion or congressional approval. The judiciary's role as arbiter in federal-state disputes is now solidified. States and cities are more empowered to challenge federal overreach in court. Future administrations must build stronger legal cases for domestic military deployments. The ruling redraws the legal battle lines, strengthening local governments' hands. Any president seeking to project military power into American cities now faces a much higher burden of proof. The Supreme Court's decision sent shockwaves across the nation, drawing sharply divided reactions that reflected the country's deep and persistent partisan divides. The ruling quickly became a flashpoint for debate, with emotions running high on both sides of the issue. Supporters of the decision hailed it as a landmark victory for the rule of law, arguing that it reaffirmed the importance of constitutional checks and balances. Many saw it as a crucial step in preventing presidential overreach and protecting democratic institutions from the concentration of power. On the other hand, critics, including former President Trump and his allies, condemned the ruling, claiming it undermined federal authority and jeopardized national security. They argued that the decision could weaken the executive branch's ability to respond swiftly in times of crisis, and accused the court of overstepping its bounds. The ruling has only intensified the ongoing debate over the scope of executive power, the balance between federal and state authority, and the proper role of the military in domestic affairs. Lawmakers, legal scholars, and citizens alike are now grappling with the broader implications for civil-military relations and the future of American democracy. Notably, the unusual coalition that formed the majority opinion highlights that these are not merely partisan issues, but rather deep and complex constitutional questions that cut across traditional political lines. The justices' reasoning reveals the profound challenges in interpreting the limits of presidential authority. Looking ahead, the nation is likely to witness further legal battles, and perhaps even legislative reforms aimed at clarifying the laws governing domestic military deployments. The decision has sparked renewed calls for Congress to revisit and update statutes that define the president's powers in times of emergency. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's decision stands as a defining statement on the limits of presidential authority and the evolving role of the military in American civic life. It will shape the boundaries of executive power for years to come. While the ruling sets a vital precedent, the underlying tensions between the White House, the states, and the courts remain unresolved, ensuring that the debate over the separation of powers will continue to shape the nation's political landscape.